Remember how I said earlier in the week how it was really warm in Indianapolis and I was kind of enjoying it?
You did say that.
Yeah, I'm glad I brought my coat.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, it went from like 65 yesterday to like 24 this morning.
Okay.
I heard a rumor that you liked it there so much you're extending your stay a couple weeks.
That is not
a little
true. I will
vacation
be
out of it.
flying home as soon as we are finished this podcast, and I'm looking forward to that. This is the Eagle Eye Podcast presented by Nissan. Reuben Frank, Dave Zangaro. It's been a productive week at the Combine here.
Good. Yeah, it's a great opportunity. It's I kind of miss it in a way, just the access, seeing guys you don't really get to spend time with. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah, like the networking side of it is huge. It's just always hit or miss, right? Like you never know who you'll see and what you'll find out. But
it's funny how like there'll be guys that we're just not allowed to talk to all year. And then you run into them somewhere in Indianapolis and they're just your best friend.
It was funny. It was so windy this morning. And I saw like an Eagles executive walking by. I said hi to him. In my head, I'm thinking, please don't stop and talk to me because I would have to sit here and talk to you. But it is so cold. Yeah, we have a lot to talk about today. We on the last pod, we had just heard from Howie and Nick. And there was one part of that I want to get into deeper. So we're going to start with that. It was what they said about playing young players. And I know we touched on it in the last pod, but to me, their answers were interesting because they didn't quite add up together.
Yeah. I mean, either you're committed to it or you're not. And sometimes the young guy might not be at that moment the best option, but maybe when you look long term, he's got to get the playing time. So which is it going to be? Are they going to play the best guy or are they going to play the young guys? We'll see.
Yeah, and you look back at last year and even the year before, I think there were a lot of opportunities to play younger players and they opted for the veterans. And like part of you understand that because you're in this win now mode.
Right.
But there were also opportunities that I think like in the long run, you'd be better off playing, some younger players. And you can kind of go through the list. I mean, they played Jalen Carter a ton. He was clearly ready. Nolan Smith did not play very much. Tyler Steen got one shot to be a starter, and then they went back to Suopeta. Sidney Brown clearly should have played more early on than like Justin Evans or Terrell Edmonds. Like there were so many examples this year.
And I saw Keely Ringo in there too.
Yeah, Keely could have played earlier, and now he eventually got that opportunity. But it's an interesting place to be because there's value in playing these younger players, and how we said like, hey, yeah, we're going to be committed to this. And then Nick's going, we're going to play the best guy. And you understand that too, to a certain extent, because he's the head coach and he's trying to win each and every game.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if you mentioned Nakobe last year, who I thought there were opportunities to get him on the field. And look, it's a tricky thing because, they might say, well, if we hadn't taken it slowly with Keely and Sidney, especially later round guys, they wouldn't have played so well late in the season when they did get their opportunity. They weren't ready yet. There's no way for us to know. But look, we saw these guys in training camp. We didn't really see them in practice once the season started other than warm-ups. But my sense, just from watching guys on the few reps they got, even on special teams, you can tell when somebody's ready for more playing time. And I thought that whole group was. Now, Nolan, I think we needed to kind of learn something about him, and we just never got the chance till really the very end of the season. I mean, it's easy to say he was disappointing, and he was, but he didn't get any reps. He didn't get any playing time either. So first-round pick. So I'm more in the school of you got to find some sort of way to get these guys on the field. If you don't want to give them 40 reps, 50, whatever, that's fine. But get them on the field, give them a taste of it, see what they can do. And if they handle it well, ramp it up. And they just didn't do that. Not till like the last few weeks.
Yeah, the Nolan thing, I think in the back of my mind is always the shoulder. Like how big of an issue was it? Was that part of the reason we didn't see him as much as we probably wanted to? And I think there's a very good chance of that. But like, yeah, you wanted to see him because even at a rotational position, it can help the guys who are ahead of them. Like there's no question that right now the three guys who played ahead of Nolan Smith were better last year, but Nolan could have improved. And like with Sydney, like maybe Justin Evans was a better player in week 2, but like Sydney has more potential. And
Yeah.
I think,
And I'm not even convinced Justin Evans was a better player in week 2.
yeah, I don't know, but uh, it's a tricky thing because you don't want to force feed these guys into their offense or defense either. But I think you have to be a little more opportunistic. Like, and N'Kobe last year was a great example or 2 years ago at this point, because if he would have played, I think maybe they would have had a better sense of what they had.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And I can see both sides of it. I mean, for the most part, I mean, TJ Edwards was playing really, really well, and Kaiser was kind of up and down. And I thought there were times where they could have found a role for N'Kobe. But I get it. You're trying to get to a Super Bowl, and sometimes there's not time to to bring these guys along. But I did think it was interesting that Howie's the one that wants to play the young guys. That makes sense. He drafted them. And Nick's the one who wants to play the older guys. At least that's what it sounded like. Not play the older guys, but play whoever's better, which in a lot of cases is going to be the veteran. He's trying to win games, as many as possible. So they've got to get that figured out and figure out what the plan's going to be. But I know that Nick has to kind of take a broader view of this and understand that in the long run, getting these guys playing time early is going to be beneficial.
I thought it was curious too that Howie mentioned him and Nick had talked about it. And yeah, they basically said, yeah, we're on the same page with this. We know we're going to have to play young guys. And then Nick, 10 minutes later goes, we're going to play the best players.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's a fascinating situation. And I think any scout, GM, personnel guy is going to want his guys to play. And there's always, since I started covering this team, there's always been that kind of relationship, and it's at times very adversarial, or early on between coaching and scouting. When the Eagles were at the Vet, it was always it was first floor versus the fourth floor. The fourth floor was where the scouts were, and the first floor was where the coaches were, and they all hated each other. I mean, and I think Andy Reid, I remember having a conversation about him. He said, old school football, coaches and scouts and personnel, it was always an adversarial relationship. And it was something he really wanted to change. He said, if you're pulling in different directions, it's not going to be beneficial for the team. And he was really big on getting the coaches and scouts together. He had guys that did both. Nick has had guys who've done both, and it's just important that they all work together and they're after the same thing. But it's got a whole history of not being that way, and I don't think Howie and Nick are at that point. But certainly there was mixed messages coming out of that podium on Tuesday.
Yeah, and it was the one thing that kind of stuck with me most. In the moment when we heard them speak, it was Nick talking about blending offenses, which kind of a little siren blared in my mind when he was talking about that. But then you go back and you kind of read through again, and you go, wait a second, that didn't quite line up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully Howie brings in some young players that Nick has no choice but to play.
Yeah. And look, Jalen Carter was that, right? Like there were no arguments about him getting playing time last year because he was clearly ready. And I think it's about rookies are going to make mistakes. And if you're the coach, sometimes that's hard to swallow. Like maybe Justin Evans isn't, I feel like I'm picking on Justin Evans. Let me pick on Terrell Edmonds for a while. Maybe Terrell Edmonds isn't going to make a great play. He's not going to have a 99-yard pick six, but he's probably also not going to miss an assignment. Or he's not going to. So you kind of live with both sides of that. But the idea with Sidney Brown is, and I'm using him as an example, if you play him early, you get the splash plays, hopefully, but then you also don't have the missed assignments late in the season either.
Yeah. But again, I mean, if you're sitting here 7-1 or 8-0 like last year, whatever, I can see why Nick would just want to go with the safe guy, the sure thing, the known quantity. Then, hey, We're undefeated. We're trying to get the number 1 seed. We're trying to be the only NFC team to get a first round bye. Let's play all these rookies. I can see it both ways. It's a tough. As Carson would say, it's a fine line. It's a tough line to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, that's all I had on that. We can move on, but I think that's going to be fascinating to watch. And we're here while I'm here in Indy at the Combine, so like some of those players are going to end up in Philly, and sometimes it's not always easy to figure out what kind of roles they're going to have. I mean, in training camp, we thought Nolan Smith was going to be the third guy in that edge rotation, and he was fifth for a while before Barnett got cut.
Yeah. If you had asked me at the end of training camp, and I'm sure we talked about it between the end of the open period where we saw him every day and the start of the season, I would have thought he'd be playing 30 snaps a game. I would have thought he'd have 6 sacks. I thought he'd just be a really solid piece of that edge rush group. Just never happened.
Yeah. And from what I hear, like the Eagles are still very high on him, and I'm bullish on him too. I saw enough flashes.
Are you?
Yeah, I saw enough flashes in training camp. I think he can be good. I think health is something to watch with him. But yeah, if he's healthy next year, I think he can still be a good player. I'm maybe a little more skeptical after not seeing it for an entire season, but I still think there's something there.
Yeah, I'm not super confident because the combination of the lack of production and the shoulder, but certainly there's been a lot of edge rushers, a lot of guys at every position who don't have good rookie seasons and become really good players.
Yeah, and look, don't get me wrong, I'm concerned about the shoulder too, based on just how limited he was all year in playing time, and we talked to him in the preseason. But if that isn't an issue going forward, then I think there's talent.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite Jeremiah Trotter story?
My favorite Jeremiah Trotter story. Back when he was drafted, was it 98?
98.
98. So back then we used to freelance for Eagles Digest, which was it wasn't owned by the team yet. The team later bought it, and I couldn't write for them anymore. But they were independent, some publishing company out of Miami, and Dave Spadaro was the editor. He wasn't working for the Eagles; he was working for Curtis Publishing, and he assigned me a story on this young draft pick named Jeremiah Trotter, who I didn't know anything about. And I started talking to him. I still remember I was outside the locker room in the concourse at the vet, and I asked him about life down in Texas. What town? I can't remember what town he was from. Was he from Hooks? But
Hooks, Texas.
Yeah, I don't know how I remember that. I don't remember where I parked today, but I asked him what he did down there, and he said, "I chop wood." I was like, "No, he's like, I chop wood. I help my dad. I chop wood every day. I'll go out in the woodshed and start chopping wood." And I was like, this is a really interesting guy. And we talked about that and how that kind of helped shape his work ethic. And obviously that became a big part of his persona. But I remember writing that story 26 years ago about Trot chopping wood as a kid, like really young kid. He'd be out there. And it really shaped who he was and who he became.
Now, I don't know how much wood there was to be chopped in South Jersey, but are you ready to cover another Trot?
It could happen.
How would that make you feel, first off, before we get into the kid?
It wouldn't make me feel old. No, Dave.
Okay.
I mean, I covered Flipper Anderson. I think I covered his granddaughter in track. So this is nothing new.
So the first one that made me feel old was Asante. When Asante Samuel Jr. was coming out of the draft, and I was like, wait a second, I covered Asante, like briefly, but I don't know how I could potentially cover 2 generations. That scared the heck out of me.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've covered any father-son combinations. I'm sure I have. But no. I think it would be a difficult situation for him. He seems like a really sharp kid and mature kid. But I mean, that name and then playing in this city, I'm not sure he's the player that his dad was. But That's a lot of pressure, having that name and wearing that uniform. But I mean, I think he has a chance to be a really good player.
Yeah, he does. He's a fascinating prospect. We had that national conference call with Daniel Jeremiah last week, and he mentioned that it's not the particularly strongest off-ball linebacker draft, but he thinks Trotter's like a day 2 pick, maybe 3rd round. Maybe he can get up into like late 2nd round. I think, if you're the Eagles, they're certainly not going to draft a linebacker in the 1st round. That's well established, but they need linebackers. Now, and it seems like he would embrace it. It would certainly be a lot of pressure, and I think that would be tough. But I was impressed talking to him the other day, just how willing he was to embrace being the son of a really great player.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the challenge. If you're going to embrace it, I mean, you have to embrace it. You can't run from it. You can't hide from it. Every question he gets, if he comes here, is going to be about his dad, and there's no 2 ways around it. And it's going to be hard to live. I mean, Trot was he a 4-time Pro Bowler?
Mm-hmm.
He was a great player, and 3 stints here. I kept bringing him back. Man, I remember when he got cut after the 3rd time. We were in the bubble, and I think we got word during practice that Trot had gotten cut. And I remember I wanted to talk to Jim Johnson about it. Jim just loved Trot. And they were together the whole time pretty much, other when he was in Washington. And Jim left practice really quick, really abruptly, as soon as it ended. He's walking up the steps, like into the front door of the NovaCare, and I ran after him. And he was just about to go in the door where at that time, I'm still not allowed, but I stopped him and I was like, Jim, I just wanted to get a quick comment from you on Trot. He said, I can't do it. I'm sorry, Rube. And it's the only time he's ever, not wanted to talk, but he was so emotional and he was just so upset. He couldn't talk. He was on the verge of tears. And that's how strong that relationship was between Jim Johnson and Trot. And yeah, but it's a lot to live up to. I mean, I'm trying to think of a comp, and I just don't know if I can think of one in this city. I'm sure there are some.
Well, it was funny during that Jeremiah conference call. He started off with the joke. He's like, "Does Mike Schmidt's kid play baseball? Like, could they draft him to the Phillies?" Yeah, it's he was a really good player here. The cool thing is they play the same position, even though it's not really even the same position anymore.
Right.
But he wears the same number, wears 54, and even started doing the celebration at Clemson, which is really fun.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you what, if he can handle the pressure that comes along with it, I would love to bring him in. I'd love to you got 2 second-round picks. That second round pick might be a little reach for him. We'll see how it goes for him in the combine, but
I think he's going to run well. I think that'll help if he runs well.
Yeah. Yeah, but he'd certainly be in the mix for me. I think when I do my all Eagles mock, I think you might see him in the 2nd round.
Panderer. No,
it makes sense. Like, I mean, they need a player like that.
Yeah, they do. And I think it's possible that happens. Like, they need linebackers.
Yeah.
Like, you look at who they have. Nakobe and Ben Van Sumeren.
Ben Van Sumeren has really done well with dealing with his dad being, Ben Van Sumeren Sr. Yeah. Where would Trot have gone to public school if he went to school in Jersey? Would he have been
I don't know.
Cherokee?
No. I don't know. Where do they live?
Well, that's that's what I'm asking. I don't know.
Yeah. He was fun to watch in high school, man. He was unbelievable. I got to a few of his games.
Really?
Yeah, just super dominant.
Not surprised.
Yeah, the best linebacker in the country. I mean, he was a stud, and he lived up to it. I mean, his stats at Clemson. I know people are worried about him being undersized, but that's kind of the position now anyway.
Yeah.
His stats at Clemson are unbelievable. He played at such a high level. Let me ask you this, because the Eagles drafted Nakobe, obviously an undersized linebacker. Do you think that makes them more or less likely to draft another undersized linebacker?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe less likely. I think maybe it depends on how they see Nakobe. Like they might think, well, we can't play Nakobe and Trot. And
so do you think that's about like how they view Nakobe as a player, or the idea of having two undersized guys on the field at the same time?
I think a little both. Like if they think Nakobe just isn't good, if they've seen enough of Nakobe and they already think this just isn't going to work out, then you bring him in. But if you think he's going to be our starting linebacker for the next 3 years, maybe you don't. I don't know how you can count on him. I wouldn't personally. I wouldn't. And Nakobe was a 3, so I think you can't really. It's not like he was a 1 that you devoted all these resources to. I wouldn't let that change my mind.
I'm kind of with you. Like, I don't think having a player like that, like Nakobe, can completely alter the way you handle a draft. I think you got to go through it the way you go through it.
Yeah. I think that's when you make mistakes, when you're like, well, we already have a player that's similar to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Especially if that player is not going to be here long term.
Right. Exactly. All
right. Let's take a break. We have a lot more on the other side.
You deserve a car that thrills you, a car that puts goosebumps on your goosebumps. At Nissan, we got everything from turbocharged SUVs to 100% electric vehicles that'll make your heart beat faster. Experience the thrill for yourself and shop your local Nissan store at nissanusa.com today.
Celebrity cook Steve Martorano brings his Italian-American cooking back home to Philly. Enjoy Martorano's Prime at Rivers Casino and Steve's famous meatballs with Sunday gravy, prime steaks, and more. Make reservations at Martorano's Prime on Open Table. All right, Rube.
Yeah. I just looked up. He grew up in the Trotters lived in Hainesport, so I believe that's Rancocas Valley.
Would have been RV, yeah. Another good football team.
They've had a few pretty good draft picks.
Yeah, they have.
A Hall of Famer.
Sean Bradley, you mean?
Franco Harris, Irving Fryer, Lonzo Spellman, all first-round picks. Sean Bradley.
They had another line. Desmond Moses, I believe, played there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Some random South Jersey football.
Let me give you my top 10 RV track people now. No.
We'll do that right after the pod ends.
Okay.
This is interesting. The NFL might adopt the old XFL kickoff rule. It's kind of come out this week. Troy Vincent was talking to the Pro Football Talk about it, right? What do you make of this rule change? It could add some excitement to a play that's kind of become a nothing.
Yeah, and my guess is that you love it.
Yeah, I like having that play. That play gets people jobs.
If you're going to have that play, you got to change it. It's a nothing play right now. I like the idea. I like it, and it's going to add scoring. It's going to help field position. People want scoring. The NFL wants scoring. Scoring equals eyeballs. Eyeballs equals money. So I think that's why it's going to happen. I like the idea.
Yeah. So basically, the idea behind the rule is, so for so long there've been all these stats and real data about how dangerous kickoffs are, and the real reason for it is you have these high-speed collisions at great distances. So players are able to ramp up and then they collide and they're injuries. But this rule basically have both sides closer together, so it minimizes that impact, but they still have to man up and block. And it also kind of doesn't take away the touchback, but it would, I think part of the theory here is that the touchback would be farther out, so it would encourage these returns.
Touchback would go to the 35, I believe.
Yeah, and it seems like the competition committee is like figuring out the right language and exactly, and they kind of all work together. Like, what's our best chance to get a rule passed? Like, what language, what parts of the rule need to be kind of tweaked, And by the time we get to the owners' meetings next month, I think they'll have a rule ready to be proposed and to be heard by the league.
Yeah, and I'm guessing the league would pass it.
I think so, because it's become, I mean, they tried to do the fair catch, and now it's like with that added, it really is nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have a commercial and a kickoff, and now you have like 5 minutes without any action. This would change that.
It's like the most boring way to start a football game. Like I keep my my notes during a game, and sometimes I'll write they're starting, like I don't even expect the play to happen. You know what I mean? I don't wait to write down where they're starting with the ball or that the clock might be different.
Okay. If you say so. But what happens if there's a big kickoff return?
It doesn't happen.
It happens occasionally.
Occasionally, and then I'll erase it. These computers that they have now, it's not a typewriter. See, when you type something in, you can then backspace and delete it.
I'm glad you got one of them newfangled fancy computers, Dave.
Yeah. There was some other stuff from that Troy Vincent interview. It seems like the tush push is here to stay. And that doesn't surprise me because it was here to stay last year. And brotherly shove for those who prefer that.
Yeah, and two things about that. One of the last things I talked to Kelsey about at the end of the season, I guess the week of the Tampa game, was he's like, people don't realize, like, we're going to be really good, whether they have that or not. Like, we were really good before we started doing that on goal line and short yardage. Obviously, having him, if he's not here, it'll change the equation a little bit. But I think they'll still be good at it. Might not be as good at it, but whether they have it or not, the Eagles are going to be really good in those situations because of Jalen. I mean, his lower body strength and all that. But I've never really heard a valid reason for getting rid of it other than the Eagles are better than everyone at it.
Yeah, I mean, they try to say that, like, the Giants, right, got someone injured trying to do it. But it's like, if you don't practice it well, you're going to get it hurt. I don't think that it's like a more dangerous play than any other play.
Yeah, and I know they did studies that I think it was Sean McDermott. He's on the competition committee, right? I think he was saying,
he just joined, I believe. He took a spot.
Yeah, he was saying that all the studies showed that there's no more injuries on that play than any other play. So I think it's here to stay, and it's fun. It's a fun play, and if you're an Eagles fan, it's a good play. You don't want them to get rid of it. Yeah,
it's a good point, though, that the push element of it is not the key. The key is Jason Kelce getting leverage, and it's Jalen Hurts and the guards. I don't want to leave out like Landon Dickerson and even before the tush push part of it, like you had Landon Dickerson, you said Brandon Brooks, like these giants. You can say Malu was kind of in that mix, like guys you can just run behind.
Yeah,
that's the key. It's not 150-pound Devontae Smith pushing him. Like it helps.
It's kind of funny that, you see Devontae there and like the wiry wide receiver to like push somebody and like that. That's what the focus is on, but that's not what makes the play go.
Yeah. And we've seen teams be really good at, like, the Tom Brady Patriots were phenomenal at QB sneaks.
He was the best ever. I mean, he was like 98% in his career. It's unreal. Although he played so long ago that I think the game play finder doesn't even go back to the start of his career. But he was as good as anyone. And because he was just good at everything.
It is a fun play in the link when it happens because the whole crowd goes crazy, which they shouldn't because it's an offensive play and the cadence is so important. But tell me it's not an exciting play.
Yeah,
it is. It's the most exciting play in Philly.
I don't know if it's the most exciting play. I think
it gets
70-yard.
There's the most anticipation for it.
Okay, but that's different.
I think it's exciting.
You think a 1-yard gain by the quarterback's more exciting than like a 68-yard touchdown to
in
Devontae?
A way, because it's like their signature play.
Okay, well, I like a nice deep ball here and there, but you can have your quarterback sneaks.
Okay,
get you excited.
I get excited about success rate of plays. Was there another thing we wanted to talk about, Troy Vincent? What was the other one?
Are you related to Alec Halaby?
Was there another element from that Troy Vincent interview?
I don't think so.
Okay. You want to move on then?
Yeah.
I had a chance to catch up with some of the younger corners out here in Indianapolis. Some interesting stuff from that. Do you think it's likely, or like how likely do you think it is the Eagles draft a corner? It's something they haven't done in so long, but it is an important position.
Yeah, I don't think it's super likely just because it's what everyone's talking about. It's a deep corner draft. There's guys that would really line up right where they pick or higher if Howie is Howie. It makes a lot of sense. And, even if Bradbury hadn't had a terrible year, he's 30 and Slade's 33. And you got to think about, and look, I like Keely Ringo and I like Eli Ricks. I think he's got a chance to be a player. And you have Isaiah Rodgers. I get all that. But the chance to get one of these kids in the first round and that kind of talent to play corner for you, I think it's too good to pass up. I don't think it'll happen. I think the history tells you it's going to be an offensive or defensive lineman just because that's what they do 80% of the time.
Yeah, there have been some receivers here and there.
Yeah.
I don't think they would go that route this year.
No. What stood out about the corners to you? Who did you get a chance to talk to?
Yeah, not all of them, unfortunately. They were running behind schedule, and I had
Toledo
to get
Toledo.
No, he was one of the ones who was running late, and I've kind of been on him a little bit, so I was disappointed about that. But Cooper DeJean from Iowa, he's not doing anything here physically at the combine. He had that leg injury late in the year, so. But the good news is he thinks he's going to be able to test in some capacity for NFL teams, even if it doesn't happen at the Iowa Pro Day. Like, he's going to do something for NFL teams before the draft, which I think will help him because he is pretty athletic. So that's good to hear. Some teams have talked to him about playing safety. I think he's a corner. He's played corner at a really high level.
Here's a trivia question. What first-round cornerback went to the same high school as you?
Tommy Knight.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Nice. Well done.
Arizona Cardinals?
Yeah.
Yeah, Cherokee, by the way. Yeah.
Cherokee High School. Yeah. The Chiefs. Mm-hmm. Good. I think you get that. That was before your time.
Yeah, but I know my school.
Huh.
Yeah. Mr. Rakestraw, this was fun to hear. He had committed to Alabama, planned on going there, and then at the last minute decided to decommit because he didn't want to go to a program that was as well established.
Really?
He wanted to kind of be able to build his own thing.
Interesting.
That's a pretty cool decision for 17, 18-year-old kid to make.
Yeah. And, sometimes you get opportunities at a place like Missouri that you're not going to get at Alabama or Georgia or an LSU.
Yeah, and sometimes if you go to those schools, you might have to wait to really get on the field.
It's true. That's true. And he's an interesting guy. You see a lot of corners and safeties coming out of Iowa, coming out of SEC schools. What's your take on him?
I like him. I like what I've seen so far. It's fun. There's like 5 or 6 corners who I think could go in the first round. And it seems like Terrion Arnold from Alabama has kind of been the top guy on most people's lists. But I think Wiggins from Clemson has a chance to go earlier. I think Quinyon Mitchell has a chance to be the first cornerback off the board. I don't think it's solidified. I think and next week we'll kind of go through the actual combine numbers from this week a little bit. I think it's in flux right now. I don't think it's a clear consensus on the order these guys are going to go.
The other Alabama kid, McKinstry, Kool-Aid, he's, you see him on a lot of mocks going to the Eagles because he looks like a late first rounder. Any thoughts on him? I love his name.
Yeah, we've seen him play more. Like, he's been playing in that defense for a while. I think the thought is that some of the other corners have maybe more upside, but sometimes experience matters too. We've seen him play at a high level for a long time. I didn't get a chance to speak with McKinstry either. He was running late. Sometimes these guys run late because the medicals kind of go over the time, and then the whole thing gets backed up. And I had a unfortunately run and get here. But Arnold said him and McKinstry are like really, really close. And even this week, he's had teams try to like make him like compete with Kool-Aid and like try to say he's better or worse. And he's like, no, like we're too close to do that. And he's played with him for a while now.
If you had to, let's say we know the Eagles are taking a corner at 22, who do you think is most likely there? And who would you realistically want there?
It's tricky because I think the consensus on a lot of this is going to change in the next few days.
Yeah.
Right now, I think Quinyon Mitchell would be my guy. I don't know if he's going to be there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think McKinstry or Rakestraw make a lot of sense. I think Cooper DeJean has a chance to go higher than people think too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it'd be interesting. And there's, when you have a lot of guys at one position, that means generally there's good value at the end of where they pick toward the end of the first round. They have a chance to get a pretty good corner. And as we know, it's been 22 years since they took a corner in the first round. Lito.
Yeah, Lito. But they did use the 43rd pick on Sidney Jones back in 17, right?
Yeah, 17.
So and it's a position they care about. They've spent money on it. They traded for Slay. They signed Bradbury. Like they made all these moves. It shows you that it's an important position. Part of me wonders if it's a little bit of coincidence that they haven't drafted one. Whereas, I think linebacker is a position where they haven't put resources into it.
I think philosophically, that's probably true. I don't think they're philosophically opposed to taking a corner, which they are at linebacker. But here's an interesting trivia question. There's only been one corner the Eagles have drafted in the last 20 years who started 10 games in a season for the Eagles. Isn't that crazy?
Rasul?
No, he started 8 that one year.
Since when?
Since in the last 20 years, since
Jalen
04 Jalen Mills in the Super Bowl season. And they've done okay with some veterans, but I just feel like it's time. It's time to address it.
Yeah, and the more I think about Bradbury, I still think he's gone.
I do too.
Yeah. I don't know what game Howie's playing.
Well, here's his out. If they cut him or trade him or whatever, can't imagine they're going to trade him, but they cut him. Say, well, you said he was part of the plan. It's like, yeah, cutting him was part of the plan. Right? I mean, he'll talk his way out of it.
Yeah, but we're in agreement on that. I what we saw was bad.
It was really bad.
I think if he's here, it's because they've talked themselves out of cutting him. I don't think he can be here next year.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. He's not the kind of guy you'd want as a backup. I mean, you have some young corners who have shown some promise. Mm-hmm. Maybe they know they're going to draft a corner, and after that, say, well,
things changed. Yeah.
Yeah, things changed since February. He was like, when was that? That was in February. I just can't imagine. And I mean, the cap is going to be so big next year. If you June 1st them, $17 million against a $300 million cap is going to be pocket change.
Yeah. And in general, I think it's probably fair that we recalibrate in general when we're about to hit free agency. And I think a lot of the numbers we're going to see are going to seem outrageous, but there's inflation here. You have so much more to work with that. Yeah. I'm curious to see what happens that first day when we start hearing about contracts. If people kind of lose their minds, you have to remember that the numbers mean different things now.
Yeah, that's true. That's always a fun day.
What do you make of L'Jarius Sneed? We'll be a free agent. We'll see what happens there with him in Kansas City. There was a report from Tony Pauline that a few of the Eagles players from Louisiana Tech have been trying to recruit him, which happens, right? He's a great player.
Great player.
Would you be on board with that?
How could you say no?
Yeah.
It's not my money.
He might have raised his stock as much as anyone in a contract year. by the way he played last season.
He was incredible. Yeah. Postseason, he was incredible. I mean, it's going to cost you a fortune, but they have the cap space. They have the money. I think he might be disappointed that Matty P's not still here.
Hey, look at us. We waited until minute 40 to squeeze a Matty P reference in.
A minute 40? Oh, minute minutes. 40. There's a minute 40. Man, if you have any chance, you pursue that.
Do you have thoughts on, like, we've talked about how the Eagles have built that position more through veterans as opposed to younger players? Do you have a preference when it comes to certain positions like that?
I think you have to draft your quarterback.
Okay.
I think most of the time that's the way to go. Running backs, I mean, obviously Swift had a good year, but I generally feel like they have such a limited shelf life that if you get a corner as a free agent, odds are he's not going to have much left. This was a 1-year deal, and he played really well. It seems like he's still got a lot left, but other than that, I don't think so. I mean, they've had really good success with free agent corners. I mean, they just have free agent DBs in general. You look at Malcolm and Rodney, and Asante you mentioned. They just haven't drafted a ton of D-backs in the first few rounds. When they haven't really hit on them. So, but other than running back and quarterback, I don't think so. I think it's just about getting the best player. Yeah.
I wonder, do you think the Eagles have certain ways to look at positions like that? Because corner, certainly it's pretty stark, right? Like they haven't used a ton of high draft picks. That 17 year where they used a second and a third. The second was a high second. The third was a late third on Rasul. But they haven't thrown a ton of draft picks at cornerback. Fourth rounder, which was really a third rounder last year.
Yeah. I think if Rasul had stayed here, he would have had the career. He's had a nice career.
Mm-hmm.
Going into year 8. He's got like 20 picks. It's been productive.
He was productive in college too. Like he seems to have a knack for picking off passes.
Do you know what junior college he went to?
I did at one point.
You're 2 for 2 on the trivia questions. Nassau Community College in Uniondale, right across the street from Nassau Coliseum.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't sense that. I don't think they. I mean, obviously, we know they're not going to draft linebackers high, but they'll draft linebackers. So I think it's more like they feel like they can find starting linebackers like in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, which they have done, undrafted. Their best linebacker recently was an undrafted guy, TJ. But it's an interesting question. When you run into Howie in Indy, well, you won't be there much longer, but it's a good question for him.
Yeah, unless he's on my flight, I don't have much of a chance to.
I think he's staying.
He's probably going to stay through the end of the draft. This is crazy. I got back to my hotel after going to talk to the corners, and I asked for a late checkout earlier because I wanted to be able to do the podcast up here. And the guy tells me that's fine, but like your key card is going to stop working at noon. So it was like stop by the desk to get a new one so you can get in your room. I said, okay, fine. So I get back. It's like 12:05. So I'm waiting at the desk and there's just no one there. I'm waiting for like 10 minutes and there's no one there. So I was like, well, let me try it. And my key card worked fine.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm worried about the desk attendants. What happened to them? I
don't know. It's like it's middle of the day. Where is everyone? I guess it's not a check-in time. Checkouts are already over. So probably went to lunch.
You got to have somebody there.
There was no one there.
I had a I'm not going to say where the hotel was. I had a hotel after one of the night games, the home night games, because we had to be back down there early the next day. And I got there like, because we did the podcast. I probably got there like 3 a.m. and the door was locked. The hotel front door was locked. They lock it, I guess, from like midnight till 6 or something. And there's nobody in the lobby. There's nobody working at the desk. I'm banging on the window. I'm like going around banging on the other windows. There's a doorbell type thing. I'm ringing that. I'm calling the hotel. I can hear the phone ringing, and nobody nobody picks up or anything. And I'm like, I'm in the weeds. I'm banging on the and I was out there for like 15, 20 minutes. And finally, like some guy some guy wanders by and is like, can I help you? I'm like, yeah, I want to check in. He's like, oh, come on in. Like,
That's weird. Normally they have like a buzzer.
they did. And I was buzzing it, but yeah, no, wasn't happening. That's when that other hotel had canceled my room, even though I had it reserved. Yeah. So I had to I'm just driving around trying to find a hotel. Wasn't my favorite night. Anyway.
The glamour of the job.
Yeah. Anyway.
Right. If you enjoy the Eagle Eye Podcast, please do us a favor, rate and subscribe wherever you get your pods. If you're watching on YouTube, please click that like button, subscribe there as well. I've got a flight to catch. Rube, any final words?
No, safe travels. We'll see you back home.
All right. Sounds good. We'll talk to you guys next week.